Margaret Stone stepped carefully down the metal ramp of the small human transport ship, her black diplomatic case held firmly in her right hand. The docking bay of the massive Arcturian space station stretched out before her like a cathedral made of gleaming metal and crystal. Alien workers moved cargo containers with mechanical precision while armed guards watched every movement from elevated platforms. She wore a simple gray business suit that had seen better days, and her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun that made her look older than her 52 years. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her identification claimed, a mid-level human diplomat sent to negotiate shipping rights with one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. The Arcturian guards towered over her as she approached the security checkpoint. Their blue skin had a metallic sheen under the harsh station lighting, and their forearms moved independently as they scanned her documents and searched her belongings. Margaret stood patiently while they examined every item in her case, from the standard diplomatic protocols to the small gifts she had brought from Earth. "Purpose of visit?" one guard asked in heavily accented English, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Diplomatic meeting with King Krell," Margaret replied in her calm, practiced tone. "Trade negotiations regarding safe passage rights for human merchant vessels." The guard studied her for a long moment, his large black eyes unreadable. Humans were still newcomers to galactic politics, barely worth the attention of the great powers. Most species viewed them as primitive creatures who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than skill. Margaret had grown accustomed to such dismissive stares during her 40 years of diplomatic service. "Follow the blue line to the royal sector," the guard finally said, waving her through with one of his massive hands. "Do not deviate from the marked path." Margaret walked through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. The ceiling stretched impossibly high above her head, covered in murals depicting Arcturian military victories over dozens of conquered worlds. Alien nobles in elaborate robes paused their conversations to stare at the human diplomat as she passed, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. She had studied the layout of this station for months, memorizing every corridor and emergency exit. Her briefings had told her that King Victor Krell ruled the Arcturian Empire with absolute authority, controlling 12 star systems and commanding a fleet of over 3,000 warships. He had agreed to this meeting only because humanity's recent discovery of rare mineral deposits in the Outer Rim had made them suddenly valuable as trading partners. What the briefings had not mentioned was how many former humans now served in the Arcturian military. Margaret recognized the type immediately: opportunists who had abandoned their own species for the promise of power and wealth among the aliens. She spotted at least 3 of them among the king's advisors as she entered the reception area. Lord Commander James Vex had been a human naval officer before defecting to the Arcturians 5 years ago. He now wore elaborate alien armor and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed he had chosen the winning side. Admiral Susan Blackwood had once served in Earth's diplomatic corps before selling classified information to alien governments. Both watched Margaret's arrival with barely concealed contempt. "The human ambassador has arrived, Your Majesty," announced a court official whose species Margaret did not recognize. The creature had too many joints in its arms and spoke through a translator device that gave its voice a metallic echo. King Krell sat on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal. His imposing frame filled the ornate chair, and his 4 arms were decorated with rings that probably cost more than most human ships. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. "Ambassador Stone," he said, not bothering to rise from his throne. "How good of you to make the long journey to our humble station." Margaret performed the traditional bow that her cultural training had taught her, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. "Your Majesty honors me with this audience. The United Earth Government is grateful for your willingness to discuss our proposal." The king's laugh echoed through the vast throne room. "Yes, your proposal. Safe passage for human merchant ships through Arcturian space. Protection from pirates and raiders. Preferential trading rights at our commercial stations." He leaned forward slightly, his black eyes glittering with amusement. "Tell me, Ambassador, what makes you think humanity deserves such generous treatment?" Margaret straightened and met his gaze directly. This was the moment she had been preparing for since leaving Earth 3 months ago. "Because cooperation benefits us both, Your Majesty. Our mineral extraction technology could increase the productivity of Arcturian mining operations by 30%. Our agricultural techniques could help feed the growing populations of your outer colonies. And our diplomatic experience could prove valuable in your ongoing negotiations with other galactic powers." Several alien nobles exchanged glances at her words. Margaret caught the subtle body language that indicated surprise. They had not expected such a direct response from the human diplomat. In their experience, representatives from weaker species usually began with flattery and submission. How refreshingly honest, King Krell mused, settling back into his throne. Most ambassadors spend hours praising our wisdom and power before making their requests. You get straight to the point. I believe in efficient communication, Your Majesty. Both our peoples have better things to do than waste time on unnecessary ceremony. The king studied her for several long seconds, his expression unreadable. Around them, the court had fallen silent, waiting to see how he would respond to the human's bold approach. Indeed, he finally said. We shall discuss this further at tonight's formal dinner. I look forward to learning more about humanity's potential. The formal dining hall sparkled with light from 1,000 crystal formations embedded in the walls. Margaret sat at the massive circular table, surrounded by alien dignitaries from across the galaxy. The Centauri ambassador picked at his food with three-fingered hands while discussing trade routes. The reptilian delegate from the outer systems hissed softly as she spoke about mining rights. Margaret ate slowly, listening carefully to every conversation around her. Years of diplomatic training had taught her to pick up information from casual remarks and whispered comments. What she heard tonight made her stomach tighten with concern. The humans grow too bold, murmured Ambassador Thomas Reed from the Centauri Coalition. He had been human once, but cybernetic implants now covered half his face, and his loyalty belonged entirely to his alien masters. Their ships appear in new systems every month. Dangerous expansion, agreed a tall alien with gray skin and no visible eyes. They claim to be peaceful, but their mining operations destroy entire asteroids. Margaret continued eating her meal as if she heard nothing unusual. But her trained senses picked up other details that worried her more. The guards around the room had changed positions twice during dinner. The exits that had been open when she arrived were now blocked by armed soldiers. Most telling of all, several alien guests kept checking small communication devices and glancing in her direction. King Krell sat at the head of the table, his forearms gesturing grandly as he told stories of ancient battles. But Margaret noticed that his eyes kept returning to her, studying her reactions to each comment about human aggression and expansion. She began to suspect that this dinner was not about negotiation at all. Tell us, Ambassador Stone, called out Admiral Blackwood from across the table. How do you explain your people's rapid military buildup in the disputed zones? Margaret set down her fork and looked directly at the traitorous human. Admiral, I believe you may have received incorrect information. Earth's defense forces have not expanded beyond their authorized patrol areas. Really? Blackwood smiled coldly. Then how do you explain the destruction of the vegan mining facility last month? A murmur of concern rippled around the table. Margaret kept her expression calm, but her mind raced through the implications. She had heard nothing about any destroyed facility, which meant either Earth Command had kept important information from their own ambassador, or someone was spreading false accusations. I have no knowledge of any such incident, Margaret replied honestly. If you could provide details, I would be happy to investigate and respond appropriately. King Krell suddenly stood, his massive form casting shadows across the entire table. The conversations around them stopped immediately, and every alien in the room turned to face him. Margaret felt the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Distinguished guests, the king announced, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. We gather tonight to witness something important. Something that will be remembered throughout galactic history. Margaret remained seated, but her hands moved slightly to rest flat on the table. Old instincts from a life she had left behind began to stir in the back of her mind. Every muscle in her body prepared itself without conscious thought. The human species has revealed its true nature, King Krell continued, beginning to pace around the table like a predator circling prey. They speak of peace while building weapons. They ask for protection while planning conquest. Their ambassador Stone sits among us tonight, but she is not what she appears to be. Several alien dignitaries began reaching for their personal communication devices. Others pushed their chairs back from the table, creating distance between themselves and the unfolding drama. Margaret noticed that none of them seemed surprised by the king's accusations. You see, Krell said, stopping directly behind Margaret's chair, our intelligence services have been watching human activities very carefully. We know about the secret military bases. We know about the weapons research. And we know that Ambassador Stone is not really a diplomat at all. Margaret slowly turned in her seat to face the towering alien king. Your Majesty, I believe you have been given false information about. Silence. Krell's voice boomed through the hall. You are a spy, sent here to gather intelligence for humanity's planned invasion of our territory. This meeting was never about trade negotiations. It was about infiltration and sabotage. 20 armed guards suddenly stepped out from concealed positions around the room. Their energy weapons hummed to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the crystal walls. The alien guests quickly moved away from the table, some recording the events with their devices while others simply watched in fascination. Therefore, King Krell declared, I will demonstrate to the entire galaxy what happens when species threaten the stability of our empire. The execution of this human spy will send a clear message about the price of deception. Margaret looked around the room at the circle of weapons pointed at her. She saw the eager faces of aliens who wanted to witness human weakness. She saw the smug satisfaction of the human traitors who had betrayed their own people. And she saw something else in the king's eyes that told her this had been planned long before she ever arrived at the station. Your Majesty, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, are you absolutely certain this is the path you wish to take? Krell's laughter echoed off the crystal walls. Look at her, he called to his guests. The human finally shows fear. Yes, Ambassador Stone, I am very certain. Your death will prove that humanity is weak and unworthy of the protection they seek. Margaret nodded slowly and stood up from her chair. She brushed an imaginary piece of dust from her gray suit jacket and looked directly into the king's 4 black eyes. What a pity, she said softly. I had really hoped we could handle this diplomatically. The first guard reached toward Margaret's shoulder with his massive blue hand. He never touched her. Margaret moved like water flowing downhill, her body shifting to the left as her right hand struck upward into the guard's throat. The alien made a choking sound and stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the floor. Before anyone could react, she had already spun toward the second guard, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus with surgical precision. The transformation was shocking to witness. The quiet diplomat who had sat politely through dinner vanished completely. In her place stood something that moved through the chaos like a deadly dance, each step calculated and every motion serving a purpose. Her gray business suit somehow made the violence more unsettling, as if death itself had dressed for a business meeting. Impossible, breathed Lord Commander Vex, fumbling for his sidearm. She's just a human woman. Margaret caught his wrist as he drew the weapon, twisting it until he cried out in pain. The energy pistol fired harmlessly into the crystal ceiling, sending sparkling fragments raining down on the terrified dinner guests. She relieved him of the weapon with one smooth motion and tossed it across the room. Just a human woman, she repeated softly, her voice carrying a strange accent that had not been there during dinner. You have no idea what that means. 3 more guards rushed her from different directions, their heavy boots thundering against the polished floor. Margaret dropped low and swept the legs out from under the first one, then rolled sideways to avoid the energy blast from the second. She came up inside his guard, her hands moving in ways that seemed impossible as she struck nerve clusters and pressure points that dropped him like a stone. The third guard managed to grab her from behind, his massive arms wrapping around her chest. Margaret went limp for half a second, then drove her heel down onto his foot while simultaneously striking backward with both elbows. The alien released her with a howl of pain, and she spun to face him with a movement that was almost too fast to follow. In the deep dark woods, she began speaking in Russian, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that made several alien guests back toward the walls in terror. There stands a little house on chicken legs. She caught an energy rifle that another guard swung at her head, somehow knowing exactly where it would be without looking. The weapon shattered in her grip like it was made of glass instead of advanced alien metal. The guard stared at his broken weapon in disbelief before Margaret's palm strike sent him crashing into a group of his companions. And in that house, she continued in the same haunting voice, lives an old woman who knows the secret names of death. King Krell backed toward his throne, his 4 eyes wide with a fear he had never experienced before. Around the room, his elite guards, warriors who had conquered planets and destroyed entire fleets, fell before this single human woman like children playing at war. Margaret moved between them like smoke, never staying in one place long enough for their weapons to target her. When they fired, she was already somewhere else and their energy blasts struck walls or ceiling or each other. When they tried to surround her, she flowed through gaps that seemed too small for a person to pass through. Admiral Blackwood tried to reach an emergency communication panel, but Margaret was there first. The traitorous human found herself pinned against the wall by a woman who looked like a grandmother but moved like a force of nature. Susan, Margaret said calmly, as if they were discussing the weather instead of standing in a room full of unconscious guards. You always were too eager to betray your own people. Who are you? Blackwood gasped, her cybernetic implants sparking as Margaret applied pressure to specific points on her neck. Margaret smiled, and it was not the diplomatic smile she had worn during negotiations. It was something older and infinitely more dangerous. I told you at dinner. I am Ambassador Margaret Stone, Senior Diplomatic Representative of the United Earth Government. She released Blackwood, who slumped to the floor gasping for breath. Then Margaret turned to face King Krell, stepping over the groaning bodies of his royal guard as if they were merely obstacles in her path. But that was not always my name, she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence of the great hall. 25 years ago, in another life, I was known by something different. The intelligence services of a dozen worlds spent fortunes trying to identify me. They called me many things, but the name that stuck was the one that children whisper when they want to frighten each other. Krell stumbled backward, his massive frame trembling like a leaf in a storm. What are you? Margaret reached into her diplomatic briefcase and withdrew a small device that definitely did not belong in standard embassy equipment. Her fingers moved across its surface with the easy familiarity of long practice. I am the woman who ended the Titan Station incident in one night, she said quietly. The ghost who made an entire pirate fleet's command structure vanish like morning mist. The shadow that brought peace to the Outer Rim by convincing their leadership to simply disappear. The device in her hands began to glow, and throughout the palace, security systems started failing one by one. Blast doors sealed the throne room while communication arrays went offline. Emergency beacons fell silent, and the king's personal guard found themselves locked in their own barracks. They called me Baba Yaga, Margaret said, and her voice seemed to echo with the weight of legends. And I had hoped never to use that name again. King Krell's 4 legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto his crystal throne with a crash that echoed through the silent hall. His massive blue hands shook as he stared at the small human woman who had just destroyed his elite guard in less than 3 minutes. Baba Yaga, he whispered, his voice barely audible. That is just a story. A human fairy tale to frighten children. Margaret walked slowly toward the throne, stepping carefully around the unconscious guards scattered across the polished floor. The device in her hands pulsed with soft light as she worked, and every few seconds another security system somewhere in the palace would fail. Is it just a story? She asked, her voice gentle again, almost conversational. 23 years ago, the Titan Station housed the largest weapons smuggling operation in the galaxy. 47 of the most dangerous criminals in known space ran their empire from that floating fortress. One morning, station security found them all unconscious in their beds, with no memory of what had happened. The entire operation collapsed overnight. She paused at the bottom of the throne steps, looking up at the cowering alien king. Around them, the surviving dinner guests pressed themselves against the walls, too terrified to move or speak. The Nebula campaign lasted 6 months, Margaret continued, her fingers still working on the small device. A pirate fleet of over 200 ships terrorized merchant vessels across 4-star systems. Their leaders were brilliant, ruthless, and completely untouchable. Until they started disappearing one by one. Never any violence, never any witnesses. They would simply vanish from their private quarters, leaving behind empty rooms and confused crews. Throughout the palace, blast doors began sealing shut with soft mechanical sounds. The king's communication arrays went silent one by one, cutting off all contact with his fleet and planetary bases. Emergency beacons that should have been calling for help instead broadcast nothing but static. The Outer Rim uprising nearly sparked a galactic war, Margaret said, climbing the first step toward the throne. 3 systems in open rebellion, backed by weapons and funding from unknown sources. The rebels had captured 2 major space stations and were preparing to attack civilian targets. Then their entire command structure had the same dream on the same night. King Krell tried to push himself deeper into his throne, but there was nowhere to go. What dream? Margaret's smile was sad and distant, as if she were remembering something from long ago. They dreamed of an old woman in a small house, deep in a dark forest. She offered them a choice: abandon their war and disappear quietly, or wake up to find their rebellion had never existed at all. When they woke up, every weapons cache was empty, every hidden base was abandoned, and every piece of evidence pointing to their secret backers had vanished. She reached into her jacket and pulled out what looked like an ordinary data pad. But when she touched the screen, Screens throughout the palace began displaying command codes and authorization sequences that made several alien guests gasp in recognition. "You see, Your Majesty, the galaxy's intelligence services spent decades hunting for the ghost they called Baba Yaga. They never suspected she might be sitting across from them at trade negotiations, discussing shipping routes over tea and small cakes." Admiral Blackwood tried to crawl toward an emergency panel near the wall, but Margaret was there in an instant, her foot gently but firmly pinning the woman's hand to the floor. "Susan, I would stay still if I were you," Margaret said without looking away from the king. "Your cybernetic implants are still sparking from our earlier conversation." Krell watched in horror as his own security codes appeared on screens around the room. Military commanders across his empire were receiving new orders in his personal authorization signature. Orders to withdraw from disputed territories, stand down from aggressive postures, and recognize human shipping rights in all contested areas. "Please," he whimpered, his royal dignity completely abandoned. "I will give you anything. Territory, ships, resources, gold, name your price and it is yours." Margaret climbed another step, close enough now that the king could see the gray streaks in her brown hair and the laugh lines around her eyes. She looked like someone's grandmother, not a legendary assassin who had shaped galactic politics through fear and mystery. "All I wanted," she said softly, "was safe passage for human merchant ships. A simple trade agreement that would benefit both our peoples. I came here in good faith, hoping to build something positive between our species." She gestured at the chaos around them, unconscious guards, terrified aliens, and shattered crystal fragments glittering on the floor like fallen stars. "Now I have to explain to my superiors why diplomatic negotiations required alternative methods. Do you have any idea how much paperwork this is going to generate?" Her data pad chimed softly, and new information began flowing across the screens. Trade agreements that heavily favored human interests. Military cooperation treaties. Technology sharing arrangements. All written in legal language and bearing the king's own digital signature. "The beauty of modern technology," Margaret observed, "is that everything can be handled remotely. Your fleet commanders are already implementing the new policies. Your treasury is transferring the agreed-upon payments to human accounts. Your shipyards are retooling to build vessels for Earth's merchant marine." King Krell stared at the screens in disbelief. "You are stealing my entire empire." Margaret shook her head. "I'm saving it. Because the alternative was letting Earth send someone much less diplomatic than me to handle this situation. And trust me, Your Majesty, you really do not want to meet my replacement." Margaret straightened her gray jacket and smoothed down her hair, transforming back into the mild-mannered diplomat who had arrived on the station that morning. She stepped carefully around the unconscious guards as she walked to the communication panel near the throne, her sensible black shoes clicking softly on the crystal floor. The surviving alien dignitaries watched in stunned silence as she activated the long-range transmitter with movements that were once again calm and professional. Her voice, when she spoke, carried none of the deadly authority it had held just minutes before. "This is Ambassador Stone reporting to Earth Command," she said into the microphone, sounding exactly like a career diplomat concluding routine negotiations. "I am pleased to inform you that discussions with King Krell have reached a successful conclusion. The Arctarian Empire has agreed to all terms proposed in our initial trade package." Behind her, King Krell nodded frantically from his throne whenever she glanced in his direction. His four hands shook as he gripped the armrests, and sweat ran down his blue face in streams. "There were some minor technical difficulties with the palace communication systems during our meetings," Margaret continued, "but I am confident these issues have been resolved. King Krell has expressed his strong commitment to peaceful cooperation between our peoples moving forward." She ended the transmission and turned to face the room full of terrified aliens. Her smile was warm and grandmotherly, the kind that belonged at family dinners rather than in throne rooms littered with defeated soldiers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the assembled dignitaries, "I trust you will report to your respective governments that humanity greatly values diplomatic solutions above all else. We hope this spirit of cooperation will extend to all our future interactions throughout the galaxy." Ambassador Thomas Reed from the Centauri Coalition managed to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "And if governments choose not to cooperate?" Margaret tilted her head thoughtfully, like a teacher considering a student's question. "Then I suppose they will need to arrange meetings with their local human ambassadors. Most of them are wonderful people, retired teachers looking for adventure, former merchants who enjoy traveling, elderly scholars who want to see the galaxy in their golden years." She paused, and something flickered behind her kind eyes that made several aliens take another step backward. Of course, a few of us have more diverse backgrounds in our past careers. But I am sure that will never be relevant to peaceful diplomatic discussions. Margaret walked over to where Admiral Blackwood sat slumped against the wall, her cybernetic implants still occasionally sparking from their earlier encounter. The traitorous human looked up with fear and confusion as the older woman knelt beside her. "Susan," Margaret said gently, "when you make your report to your real employers, and we both know you will, please give them a message from me." Blackwood nodded quickly, eager to avoid any further demonstration of the ambassador's hidden abilities. "Tell them that retirement does not mean disappearance. Some legends never truly die. They simply learn to wear better disguises and find quieter ways to serve their people." Margaret's voice remained soft and caring, but her words carried undertones that made the entire room shiver. The old woman in the forest is still there, even when she chooses to live in the city. She stood and retrieved her diplomatic briefcase from where she had left it during dinner. The case looked completely ordinary now, just standard embassy equipment carried by a middle-aged bureaucrat. Nobody watching would suspect it contained devices that could hack galactic military networks or weapons that had ended wars. "Your Majesty," she said to King Krell, "I believe you have some documents to sign to make our agreement official." The alien king practically leaped from his throne to reach the treaty documents that had appeared on his personal tablet. His massive fingers trembled as he applied his digital signature to page after page of agreements that gave humanity everything they had requested and much more. "Excellent," Margaret said, checking the completed contracts with professional efficiency. "Earth's merchant marine will be very pleased with these new shipping routes. And I am sure your people will benefit greatly from our agricultural technology and mining techniques." She walked toward the throne room's main exit, then paused and turned back to address the entire assembly one final time. "I do hope everyone has a pleasant evening. The palace staff should have the communication systems restored within the hour, and I understand the security doors will unlock automatically once I have departed the station." As she reached the doorway, Margaret looked back at King Krell with the patient expression of someone completing a routine business transaction. "Your Majesty, please give my regards to your sister Princess Vera when she arrives tomorrow. I believe she will make an excellent ruler when you announce your decision to step down for health reasons. Such a wise choice to let the younger generation take over during these changing times." The king's mouth fell open but no sound came out. Margaret smiled and gave a small wave to the room. "Goodbye everyone. I do hope we can work together again in the future." The palace doors closed behind her with a soft whisper of displaced air. In the throne room, 24 of the galaxy's most powerful individuals sat in complete silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Across the galaxy, intelligence agencies began updating their files. The diplomat who had just negotiated the most favorable trade agreement in human history was being cross-referenced with reports of a legendary operative who had vanished 20 years ago. Most dismissed the connection as impossible coincidence. But in the shadows of a dozen worlds, those who dealt in secrets and violence began to whisper a new warning to anyone who would listen. Be very careful which human diplomats you choose to threaten. Most of them are exactly what they appear to be, harmless civil servants looking for peaceful solutions. But some of them are something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine.